Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Make Commerce webinar. My name is Kuldar, and I'm your host today. And today we are going to talk about influencer marketing. The term has been quite a hot one for a couple of years now, and we can see businesses of all sizes use it to great success. So our speaker today, Avery Schrader, has said actually that e-commerce businesses is one of the categories to benefit from influencer marketing, maybe the best. Why is that, and how to implement influencer marketing to your marketing mix is what we're going to talk about today. The goal of today's webinar is to be a practical one. Avery is going to walk you through the bits and pieces of planning and launching an efficient influencer marketing project. You'll get both an overview of the current state of the influencer marketing in the Baltic region, as well as some actionable tips and ideas to grow your business. So, Avery is originally from Canada. He came to Estonia some years ago, I believe, with the startup visa program to launch his startup here. And Modash is now one of the top influencer marketing platforms and tools in the region, and it's growing quickly. So why Avery? I find Avery's experience and know-how and vision highly noteworthy because his approach to influencer marketing is not about flashy posts on Instagram, but it's more about efficiency and return on investment and setting up the relationship just right for both the influencer and the business. So the webinar is expected to last about an hour. After Avery's presentation, we'll have Q&A. You can drop your questions in the questions tab, and we'll go through them once the presentation is over. And of course, if you have more specific questions, then you can follow up by email. So without further ado, Avery, stage is yours.
Hey, thanks so much. Super excited to be here. I was just scrolling through the names. Hey, Helena, Kylie, Annika. Cool to see so many people here. I hope that you get what you came for, and that we give you some actionable stuff to do. Yeah, like Kuldar said, I tend to stray away from typical thought process, kind of Gary V mode of influencer marketing, and try to take a more performance approach, which tends to be sometimes people's misconceptions around this space make it difficult for me to really illustrate what I'm talking about. So the first thing I'd like to do, and I'm gonna share my little presentation here, is run a pop quiz. So people can write in the chat. That's true, right, Kuldar? I believe so.
We actually have the questions tab available, but I think the quiz is a great idea, so everybody can maybe take 2 seconds to think about it.
For sure, yeah. So, yeah, first and foremost, this is going to be about how to implement a really scalable, highly performant influencer marketing program. So not necessarily even just a campaign or one partnership or something like that, but how you can set up the systems internally that will help you make this your most effective acquisition channel, because that's my goal. We call it the ambassador method. So companies like Bolt are using this one. Buzu, which is a huge language learning app, millions of users. There's a lot of companies that are doing this super effectively. And part of the beauty, I think, for a lot of you is that it won't cost you a bunch of upfront spend that you don't know what you're gonna get in return. So yeah, there's lots of cool stuff about this, and I'm hopefully gonna cover everything. I do have that. I'll tell you how Modash helps make it happen, and I will hint a little bit, but my goal definitely isn't to sell today, but just to share some info. So first, pop quiz. How many influencers are there in the Baltics? So the goal of these questions is to, one, illustrate what's kind of happening in the region, but also break down maybe some misconceptions that we might have about influencer marketing in general. So does anybody have any idea how many people, in this question I define it as people with more than 1,000 followers, specifically on Instagram, there are in the Baltics. The second question is, who is the single highest performing influencer in the Baltics on Instagram? So that means at least based on kind of the vanity metrics that we can see on Instagram, so likes and comments and those sort of things, real followers, who is the highest performing? And the final question is, what is the average cost for a post from an influencer with 10,000 to 20,000 followers? And that question is researched in the Estonian market specifically. So, but it should play pretty well across the rest of the Baltics. So I hope you have some answers in your head. Koldar, do you want to take a guess at the first one, maybe, if you didn't see?
I think that we are talking about, let's say, 15K influencers in the Baltics.
Okay, not too bad, not too bad. So the truth is that actually over 35,000. I know the number looks fake, but I did check yesterday.
So just a quick question: what platforms are like included in this number?
So this is strictly on Instagram, actually.
Okay.
So if you were to include, actually, there's a surprising number of TikTok influencers in the Baltics as well. Like maybe even another 35,000 profiles on TikTok, and that doesn't include YouTube and so on. So a lot more than many people think. Sometimes we get if we're talking to a local company, which doesn't happen so often anymore, but if we are, then they sometimes have this feeling that they know all the famous people. So I wanted to give you some hope that there's something out there that is worth looking for. The second question was, who's the highest performing influencer in the Baltics?
I'm going to be honest here. I have I have some ideas, but probably not on the Baltic level.
Okay. That's fair. Well, okay. So most people's answer to a question like this is probably like Tanal Padar or some really famous local. And the truth is that you've probably never heard of her. Her handle is Akruze, and at least last December, when we ran a collaboration ranking all the influencers in the Baltics, I think she had about 40 or 50,000 followers at the time, but she had the highest number of engaged followers who were real in the Baltics. So that was really interesting, and kind of a sign again that sometimes it's not the biggest influencer that gets the most attention from their audience, but somebody a little different. And since then, I think she's doubled her audience in the last year. So it's also a sign that if you can find the diamonds in the rough, then those long-term partnerships can, you're planting seeds for the future when you partner with such high potential creative people. Yeah. And in Estonia, what's the average cost for one post from an influencer between 10,000 and 20,000 followers?
I used to work at a marketing agency, but that was years ago. So I don't have the latest, but I'm going for 300 euros.
Wow. Okay. So we surveyed, I think, something like 50 or 100 just in Estonia influencers in that bracket. Many said less than 50. So this was the average answer. And of course, that means half of them are less than that. So, and I think we didn't include zeros in that as well. So like except just product. So quite inexpensive, but that said, after this webinar, I don't think you'll ever want to pay for a post again, and you'll be focused much more on conversions. So without further ado, I guess we can move forward. Yeah, and of course, save your questions, write them down. Get ready to spam the chat with questions at the end. So I'm happy to answer specific questions about your situation, your business. If you feel you have a unique business model that this doesn't work for, or you're not sure how to execute it because you don't have resources or whatever it might be, then please ask all those questions, and I will make the answer broad enough that it's useful for everybody. So feel free to ask specific questions. Nice. So in this ambassador format, the very first step is always choosing a target market. For for some of you, you might feel like that's local, and that's fine. We call this a guinea pig market. Sometimes if you don't necessarily care because you ship globally and so on, then we always ask people to choose a guinea pig market. So where's the place that you're going to start testing and where you're going to focus your effort so that you can reach some kind of, sometimes I refer to it as attention liquidity. You can call it brand awareness, or the power of repeat, being present in people's lives multiple times. I think there's been some studies that show people are most likely to buy the 7th time they see your brand, or somewhere around there, 7, 8 times. So if you focus your efforts in one geographical location, you can reach people many times, or at least have the opportunity to reach them many times. Some of the kind of cheat sheet, excuse me, I'm a little sick from the last couple of weeks, but I do my best to power through here. So some of the kind of cheat sheet questions that we suggest to people are, which cities have the highest density of buyers? So we once had somebody who was selling shampoo for redheads sign up to Modash, and they said, I don't know how to choose a target market. They're writing our support, like, please help me. I'm one person. I don't know what to do. And so we suggested to them to start with Dublin or Edinburgh. And the reason was because after a quick Google search, you'll find that those 2 cities have the highest density of redheads. So in your case, it might feel like, but I sell jewelry just to women. So I'm global business and I just sell to women. So that's basically everybody. I really, really suggest that you start to filter those down, even if it's just in the beginning a wild guess. Track your wild guess. If you can write it down as a hypothesis, that's a good idea. So I think that I sell my jewelry, and I think my audience are Estonian women between 20 and 30 is much, much better than just starting with women everywhere. So yeah, and we'll get into why in a moment as well. Sometimes shipping can be a really useful way to cut some places out. So if it's really expensive for you to ship to China and Australia and America and so on, then you can kind of, for the sake of for starting an ambassador program, then you can cut those countries out and focus. We're trying to find focus. And if you're really, really not sure who your customer is, then typically it's not time to start running ads and pushing things out. You should at least have an educated hypothesis and then go out into the market and test that hypothesis. You might not be right the first time, and that's fine. It's a process of iteration. Following me so far, Koldar? Am I making sense here? I'm going to take that as a yes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely making sense.
Great. So then, once you've defined your target market, who do you contact to reach them for you? Or how do we find influencers? Yeah, so once you've defined that market, you have some idea of an ideal target audience. So an influencer, theoretically, the perfect influencer, kind of our ideal heaven, their audience matches your target audience 100%. So that means if I took a picture of your target audience and the influencer's target audience, then everybody in the picture would be exactly the same. Now that's obviously very, very difficult. It's impossible to find complete overlap. So we need to focus on a few key areas. So location is a really good one to start. So you want to have a high density of followers in that target market. So if I pick Estonia, I might want to just go, okay, let's just say Tallinn. And then I want to find people who speak specifically to people in Tallinn. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're paying to reach people you don't care about. So you want to get as much density in your target market as possible for the sake of efficiency. You're going to learn faster, you're going to spend less time, and you're going to have more effective campaigns if you know what's happening and if you do this intentionally. Sometimes I'll repeat myself in the webinar, and it's because I really believe that these are important points. So if I sound like I'm rambling on, it's really we've done a lot of these, so we're quite confident that you can do it too. Yeah, and then you want them to have real and engaged audiences. So sometimes people get stuck on these metrics. They say this, like, oh, they have fake followers, and now I can't work with that person. They have 3% of their followers are fake, or their engagement rate is less than 2%, so I can never work with that person. The truth is that's not necessarily true. These kind of metrics kind of act as good filters to narrow down your search. You can and not just in the Modash sense. If anybody's familiar with how we work, then basically it's a search engine. You can input these different criteria, and we'll show you all the results that match your criteria. So if you put in Tallinn and women and between 20 and 30, then we'll tell you all the influencers that speak to that audience. But in this particular sense, I mean, filtering your greater mission to find your first influencers to work with down to pretty high performing people. So just making sure they have less than 25% fake followers and that their engagement rate is over 2% or around average at least, then, which would be over 2%, then yeah, you're kind of ready to move forward and say, this person is worth my time to outreach to. And then you want to, again, make sure you match your target audience in gender and age as well. Koldar, feel free to stop me if I'm moving too fast or I'm not making sense.
But I think it's perfectly good and as well.
Awesome. Now this is a kind of the spine of my argument about ambassador programs, you could say. So instead of paying an influencer that we find for a post or one piece of content, we're going to pay them to get us a customer. Now, sometimes it's a bit tricky to wrap your head around because that's not what anyone else really in the market is saying from what we see, but there's a lot of reasons to do this. So what you're doing is you're paying for conversion. You pay when an influencer converts a customer. You can do that on a monthly interval. So you track how many customers an influencer converts based on either a promo code. As I understand, Maxikeskus has a workaround that allows you to use promo codes in there somehow, or you use a trackable link, a UTM link, or whatever you can manage from your side. If it's a Bitly link, that's much better than nothing. So you track those conversions, and then on a monthly interval, you pay out your influencers. So then your offer to the influencer sounds less like I'll pay you 91 euros for a post, and more like I'll pay you 10 euros for every customer that converts from your custom link or promo code. And the scale's much better. I'll talk more about it in a second. And then quotas are kind of a useful tip that a lot of people don't implement, but giving influencers a quota gives you control over your greater program. So because you're paying people on a monthly interval for how many customers they convert, you can just keep adding people to that program. So for example, if you were to add 2 a week, then you'd have more than 100, just 2 a week, you'd have more than 100 ambassadors posting about your brand all the time. But in order to keep them incentivized to post, other than just money, sometimes people need a little pressure. A quota can do a really good job. So, add Koldar, my influencer, you're welcome to join our ambassador program. We love what you do. Your webinars are great. We're going to give you this promo code. And for every customer who signs up through your promo code or your trackable link, we're going to give you 5 euros. And as long as you get 5 or 10 customers, so this is where the quota comes in, as long as you get 5 or 10 customers per month, then you remain in that program. And of course, you can give some leeway. So if somebody gets 9 customers instead of 10, if that's your quota, then you can always be nice and not kick them out right away. The reason this works so well, there's a few. One is that it's compounding. So when you run a pay per post campaign, you have to input effort to get like the same amount of effort to get a certain amount of return. So And then you have to repeat that. So you have to recruit an influencer to get 20 customers, and then you have to recruit a new influencer to get 20 customers again, in an ideal world even. But in this case, you recruit an influencer, and then you recruit another influencer, and you just keep adding them, and the previous ones keep converting customers. So after a year, like I mentioned, you'll have 100 people converting that your number of quota. So if it's 10, then we have 1,000 new customers every month, which is, I think that sounds pretty nice. I'd love to have 1,000 new customers every month. It also scales very, very well. So because you have this compounding thing, you have more opportunity to automate the processes behind it. So when you're just recruiting and negotiating and focused on all these relationship management pieces, which are really difficult to automate, then because you're doing pay per post, then you're spending a lot of time, and everything you do to invest your time is increasing your cost per acquisition, because your time is worth a lot of money. I believe, I hope you believe so too. So if you're going to spend an hour, I want to make sure that hour is worth 50 or $100 at least for most of the people in this call. So yeah, it's really important to focus on things that scale when you build these campaigns. And then one of the other benefits is that you can optimize these programs over time. So you can take data like the stuff we talked about before, the audience data, which you can also get from Modash, by the way, hint, hint. And you can use that to run experiments. So you might have a new hypothesis that you run an experiment to test. And then yeah, you're optimizing over time, automating over time, and decreasing your cost per acquisition, which is going to help you increase scale and acquire a lot more customers for the same amount of money. And I can show you what that could look like a little bit, just to illustrate my point a little better. Feel free to let me know if I hit any technical difficulties, Koldar. So yeah, so what we can see here, this is just a small sheet that I've put together. So we have the country that the influencer is in, which might be how you organize your campaign. And then you have the handle for the influencer. This is just sample data, by the way. This is not necessarily accurate in any sense. Well, the data itself is, but what I'm about to say is just hypothetical. So what we can see when we take these influencers and we organize them by their number of conversions. So we have Deanna here. In June, she converted 8. In July, she converted 9 customers. And in August, she converted another 8. And if we track these effectively and send them to our sheet, then we'll have a really, really great overview of who's converting the most, who's not converting enough. And if we map that to this sheet over here, then we get some hints into what might be going on. So, for example, Loraxo here has 83% of his followers in Estonia, and he so happens to be converting a lot more. And our other high converting influencer, Tanel Padar, also has a lot of his audience in Estonia, whereas Ketlin and Saskia don't have so many followers in Estonia. So based on this, we might create a hypothesis that says we believe that influencers with like above 80% Estonian audiences will convert more customers for us, and that helps us inform our decisions about the next people to recruit. And that's just one small example. So we might dive deeper and say, if the audience is a little bit or is mostly in this range of 18 to 24, then they convert more from these people. Or we might even go so deep as to say, if it's a female influencer, then the audience should be a little bit younger. But if it's a male influencer, the audience should be a little bit older, because that seems to be who they convert. And it might sound a little scary, but this data you can just export directly from Modash. If you tell us who to export, it only takes you a second. Or you can, even if you're not going to use a tool like ours, then you can minimally, I suggest you get some data about the audience and the basic information about the influencer so you can run these experiments. Because other things that might happen is, for example, we might have let's say it's a local holiday let's say it's somebody's birthday, and an influencer posts that they bought let's say they bought the jewelry. Let's go back to our jewelry example. If somebody buys the jewelry and makes a post that it's a birthday gift, maybe in that case the conversions go up. And if we're tracking things appropriately, then we can replicate that success. So we could say that Loraxo, he on this sometime in this month, in July, he posted that it was his girlfriend's birthday and he bought the jewelry for her, and then conversions went up. And then maybe we see a trend. So Deanna also, it was Mother's Day and she bought the jewelry as a gift and she posted it and sales went up. You can learn things by tracking the data that help you make your other influencers more successful. So once we see that, then we can suggest to our other influencers, hey, birthday posts are doing fantastic. I really suggest that you look at these 2 pieces of content and maybe do something similar. That can be helping them be successful will help you too. So you can read more about this, by the way, at modash.io/blog/CPA in influencer marketing. Will tell you more about some situations where that can be really useful. So we're almost done. Still following, Koldar? Are you still there?
I'm still here, and seems like everybody who joins are also still there. Great stuff.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm using him as my proxy metric for talking to you guys directly. So, yeah, you see that even in the webinar, I'm tracking my success over time. Maybe I can run some experiments in here too. So next is automating and making improvements. Don't worry if you didn't catch everything I've talked about so far. You can always ask, can you run through that slide again at the end of the presentation? But yeah, so automating is, the best way to hire without having to hire anybody. So some examples of the easiest ways to start automating away the work is, and quick caveat, we always recommend that people recruit the first 20 or so influencers manually. So manual outreach, very personal messaging directly to them, and so on, and then manage the support kind of process with them directly. That will help you learn and get a really good footing into what this beast is that you're dealing with. Not the beast being the influencer, but the process of building the program. And you'll start to understand how this is going to look for your business in the future more if you don't try to automate right away. But after you've got 10 or 20 people in your program and you feel like you have a good understanding of how this process works, then you can start to automate. One of the best ones to start with is outreach. So if you can collect emails somehow, again, Modash, you can just export emails for influencers. Then you can use a tool like Woodpecker or MailChimp or whatever best-in-class email tool that you're using already to automate some of this outreach. I can talk more about outreach and how to frame your voice and tone if you guys would like that at the end.
That would be very good, yeah.
For sure. Let's talk about that more specifically. Maybe somebody can throw a question in if they have it. Then you can, one easy way to get started and automate, like get a bunch of learning really fast and kind of automate your learning away, is to check out all your existing influencers. So it might be scattered and it might be scary, but if you gather the data about influencers you might already be working with, then you can get some really quick learnings, like some of the ones that I spoke about before, based on what's working now. And yeah, that's a really good start. If you're already working with influencers, but you've been doing pay per post, then seeing what's working now will guide your decisions and give you a place to start. And another pretty early stage automation to do is to have an ambassador landing page, so an FAQ guidelines type of thing. I can show you an example here. So this is Bolt's ambassador page. You can see that it's not the prettiest thing in the world. It's not, it doesn't look like they hired the top graphic design agency in the world to build this page, and that's perfectly reasonable. It's very easy to build a landing page nowadays. There's lots of tools to help you do that. If you're not already familiar already, which I'm sure most of you are, but a basic landing page that lets people apply, for example, and talks kind of like a sales pitch about why people should become an ambassador for your brand, can be super useful and help you convert people faster. So in Bolt's case, what happens here is they input some basic info into a Google form, and this is kind of the advanced version. And then data comes from Modash and helps them analyze these applicants automatically, as far as I know, at least. So yeah, and then we have some information about who the current influencers are for Bolt. They're working with thousands of ambassadors in a similar format to the one that I spoke to you about. And they really do a good job to present them here and to provide some guidelines and information that helps influencers make content, gives them some inspiration, and gives them some guidelines what to do and what not to do. They also have this. It's a little blog with some description. If you Google Bolt ambassador, then you'll probably find both of these pages after the webinar. Yeah, but you can see again, it's basically a sales pitch. So we have testimonials from other ambassadors. I'm sure that if I were to click these links, then these are quite impressive people as well. So that makes me feel like, hey, I want to be cool. I want to be a Bolt ambassador as well. And then some information making it really clear how to apply and so on. Bolt, the people at Bolt are super genius, and highly recommend stealing their ideas as much as you can find them here. Don't reinvent the wheel. Nice. So, and what that does, for the record, is gets rid of all those repeat questions. You're basically building a customer support structure for your ambassadors. And that, again, just helps you add more and more and more ambassadors to the same program without hiring people or putting in additional effort, sending emails and answering repeat questions. Yeah. And that's it from my side. Very happy to take Q&A, to cover any of those things that I mentioned before. Maybe I'll leave the presentation up, which means I can't see your questions, but maybe Koldar, you can kind of moderate Q&A, and I'm happy to go as deeply as possible.
Yeah, also we'll be able to send the presentation by email, right, afterwards.
For sure, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So yeah, a couple of questions here, and I'm going to tie them together with some of my own. So first, I would like to go a bit back to the very beginning. You said that there are like 35,001 influencers in the Baltics. So who do you actually consider an influencer? I think you mentioned that this number represents influencers with more than 1,000 followers, but is this like the follower number the only and main criteria to consider or not to consider yourself an influencer?
For sure. I mean, I think sometimes brands get stuck on the idea of what is an influencer, who meets this this grand title of influencership, and in my experience, it matters much less. Your goal is to find efficiencies, obviously. So if you're targeting the Baltics, then you kind of have to work with what you have. You don't have a lot of people with a million followers and those sort of things, and you don't necessarily need them. But yeah, like I mentioned before, it's very specific to the company that's running the program. So you want to find people who speak to a large number of your target customers as frequently as possible. Yeah. So in that case, I would define an influencer basically as that anyone who speaks to my target customer at scale often.
Hmm. Hmm. So I'm going to follow this with Paula's questions, and you can answer Marco's questions as well. Is that Paula asked that who do you consider to be top three influencers in Estonia, and Marco asked this question that what makes a great influencer?
For sure, yeah. I mean, what makes a great influencer is that they speak specifically to your target customer. So for me, that means that, I mean, there's not a lot of, we don't do influencer marketing on social because we're a B2B company rather than a B2C company. So there's not a lot of people speaking to, like, unless we were to partner with Gary Vaynerchuk or those kind of those kind of folks who we might in the future. It's not it's not practical in that sense because people aren't reaching our target audience that effectively on those platforms. But for any B2C company, then this kind of program basically makes sense in some format. So the best influencer is the one that speaks to your target audience frequently and that and engages them actively. And the top three influencers in, was it in Estonia or in
Yeah.
Baltic? In
Well,
Estonia. I'm not sure, but if you go to not to Modash, but if you search Baltic's best influencers, then you'll see, I think, a featured snippet from us or from our collaboration, that Baltic Pan-Baltic collaboration that ranked everybody, and you'll be able to see based on those metrics. But again, I really, really suggest that you dive into the data and decide for you who is the best influencer. So it's not about who's the coolest kid in the hallway at high school. It's about who's the person who reaches your target audience the best. Because if you're trying to reach the chess club, then the coolest kid in the hallway is not the one to talk to.
mm. Another thing I found very interesting in the first part of your presentation was that you suggest focusing on geographical regions. So this is kind of different compared to a lot of hype and a lot of tactics these days used on the web. So why not some clever behavioral interest-based approach? And then the second question is like, how narrow can I go with this geographical targeting?
Yeah, for sure. How narrow should you go? It definitely depends on, like, for example, I could say pick a city, but New York City is much different than Riga. So yeah, but with that in mind, like usually choosing a city, the relevant capital of the country that you're targeting is a good start. The reason that I push people to choose a geographic market is because it gets them unstuck. So people get stuck on who do I work with? What do I do? Who's the coolest? What's the best thing? And sometimes just starting from somewhere is much better than starting from everywhere. And that coupled with the fact that, you know, as I mentioned before, the seeing you everywhere will have an impact on your campaign and give you better feedback on whether influencer marketing is working for you. So if you throw one or two ambassadors in New York City, then you're not going to necessarily see all of New York City turn around and say, wow, you're the coolest thing ever. But if you throw one or two or three influencers in Estonia or in Tallinn, then you, in like a more specific geography, you're going to have a lot more probably positive feedback and a lot more feedback in general to work with to make your next decisions.
Katrin asked a question about fake followers. So how do you like discover the fake followers? How do you track those? How do I identify those? So you said that you shouldn't have more than 25% of fake followers. How do I know?
For sure. So you can use Modash to do that. It's hard for me not to come back to that just because that's our job, is to provide all this kind of data as best we can. We do a pretty good job of that. Lots of other platforms that show similar data are using our data through our API. So maybe that's a sign. But yeah, how to identify fake followers practically without using a tool is quite tricky, especially in combination with other data. So fake followers are only as bad as followers who don't reach your target audience, which sometimes people, I think, have difficulty wrapping their head around. But if I'm targeting only Tallinn, then everybody in Finland is only as good to me as a fake follower. So
Mm.
in that sense, what you can do is at least check the, like, there's this common advice about look at the comments. Are the comments all one emoji, or is the behavior of the followers really strange? Does it that can give you some small idea about whether somebody has fake followers. But the truth is that we all have robots following us. You do too, whoever you are listening. If you have an Instagram account that's not privated, and even if it is, then you have fake followers. There's robots that just crawl around Instagram and follow people. So we all have a few of them.
Mm. Marco had a question about are there any product groups where influence marketing has proven not to work?
Any
Any product groups or any categories where influencer marketing has proven not to work?
I mean, I think that to cast a wide net and say like a category doesn't work is not necessarily going to be, it's not maybe the best way to think about it, but it can be that there's something more efficient you could be doing other than influencer marketing at a given time in your company's life. So as I mentioned, in B2B, influencer marketing is really, really difficult to figure out, or some kind of like partnerships, because it would be more, it's harder to track and so on, because it's probably conferences instead of social, and it's probably it's difficult to find people who speak to our ideal customer. So B2B is an example where influencer marketing wouldn't be the first thing I suggest to people. You're much better off with cold emails probably. But in other than that, I think we've seen it work from apps like Buzu that I mentioned, language learning app that has really low barrier to entry. We've seen it work with Bolt, who doesn't have recurring revenue, or they have a ton of revenue, but it's not subscription based, so that's not necessary. We've seen product companies selling anything from beard oil to butterfly jewelry to there's a Korean company doing a social network for hobbyists. So it's kind of like a combination between it's like a hobby-based Skillshare plus social network, and they use it really effectively to drive more content creators to their platform. So we've seen influencer marketing work for almost everybody, and the truth is, it's just about overcoming the fear of starting and trying. Usually.
So what you're saying is that it more works with most cases when you have a B2C company, but I think that actually ultimately everyone is a person. So in B2B, even if you discover a super smart way to do it, then probably could work as well. But you have to probably try a bit harder.
For sure, yeah. And for most companies, it just wouldn't be their first channel. Like I think for B2C, influencer marketing can be, it's like either influencer marketing or Facebook ads usually are going to be your first channel. Everything else is like very difficult to justify. So, yeah.
One of the ideas from you is that you shouldn't really focus on pay-per-post type of activities. You much more prefer pay-per-conversion. So I think it kind of changes the whole relationship between the influencer and the marketer. How keen are influencers to jump in with this kind of model instead of pay-per-post? Because pay-per-post might seem so much easier for them, so much manageable for them. But pay-per-conversion is much more work.
Yeah, this is a great question, actually. Really big question in some sense, because there's a lot of things that prompt people to ask this question. So sometimes people get really excited about this idea, and then they go out and reach out to 3 or 4 influencers, and those 3 or 4 influencers say, no, I only do pay per post and I only charge 1,000 euros per post. And if you don't want to talk to me, that's fine. And usually our suggestion is like, yeah, there's another 35,000 people out there for you to offer this to. And the best influencers, the ones who know that they can convert customers and that their audience is highly engaged, they get really excited about this. They might negotiate with you about how much money you're going to pay them per conversion, or maybe you need to experiment with implementing like rewards. So, if you hit double the monthly quota, then you get, some extra free product, or you get €100 bonus, or you definitely have to tweak these things and run more experiments to improve your recruiting process. But yeah, sometimes people will say no, and that's totally fine. One analogy that I've used is if you're trying to pay somebody to take your dog for a walk and they just come to your house and offer to watch TV, then you're not going to pay that person. You're not going to say, oh, well, okay, he said he'll just watch TV, then that's what I can pay him for. You tell them to go away, and then you find somebody who's willing to walk your dog. So I suggest you do the same with influencers as well, if my analogy makes sense.
Marco just posted a great question, and we still have like 10-15 minutes to go. So anyone else who has questions, feel free to post them in the questions tab. So Marco asked, how long of a pipeline can be measured? For a long pipeline, is there a point or possibility to get a direct return on investment?
I'm gonna close my presentation. I think we're good there now, and I'm gonna take a look at that question because it seems a little bit more. Marco, how long of a pipeline can be measured? For a long pipeline, is there a point or possibility to get a direct? Also, no, B2B is hard, maybe because the sale might take a year to happen, and that's a good point. Business is all person to person. Yes. So I'm in a bit of trouble, but
so I guess what Marco is asking that if you use an influencer and they do their thing, post some content, and let's say that now the question is that once I see that content, I act on it maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, if I'm like in B2C category. If I'm in B2B, that's true. That might happen in 6 months. So can I still track it? Okay, you said like this promo codes is like one of the easiest, I guess, and one of the most foolproof ways to do it. But are there other ways?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So part of the beauty of these conversion-based programs is that the content about your brand is recurring. So if I check in with a channel, for example, I watch a YouTube channel called Philip DeFranco a lot. It's a news show, and in the news show, companies like Squarespace appear very often as sponsors. So they sponsor the show and they stick it right on the screen, and Philip talks about it for 2 minutes or whatever and says, make sure you go to squarespace.com/Phil to get 15% off. And I remember that because I see it so often. So the longer the pipeline, I mean, most B2C, unless, not a lot of B2C purchases are made with a lot of thought and intention. Most of it is pretty impulsive, I would say. So unless you're maybe buying a car or you're buying some really high-end luxury, not even luxury good, but like a practical, expensive good is the only time that you really think about your purchases for a long time. Even if I'm buying a new TV, I might do a couple Google searches, but beyond that, I'm gonna go to the store and buy myself a TV. So you can, to answer the question more specifically, you can. So my point was that because things are repeating, it helps get the like longer tail of the pipeline. You can also implement like trackable links, as I mentioned. You can track users based on cookies or events once they come. If I go to squarespace.com/Phil, then I know, then Squarespace probably a year later still knows it's me if I go back to the website. So yeah, you can use UTM links, you can use promo codes, you can use, I've even seen people use like a proxy metric. So instead of conversions, they say traffic to a website, like a specific page, and then they pay per 1,000 visits or whatever. Yeah, so there's lots of ways to track for sure. And Marco, if I didn't answer the question like well enough for you, feel free either to follow up with me later or ask maybe in a different way that I can be more specific.
Another question from myself. How do you feel about partnering with influencers that seem to work with just about every brand out there? How should I, as a business, kind of think about it?
Well, if you follow the format that I talked about today, then you're at no risk. Basically, the influencer will post about you and they'll reach their quota or they won't reach their quota if their audience, and you won't pay if they don't. So, or you won't pay if they don't convert a customer. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of cost upfront or risk. Yeah, so definitely worth it to have an understanding if an audience is highly engaged and if they reach your audience, but beyond that, focusing on just how many conversions they actually generate in that first or second month will tell you everything you need to know.
But should I be worried like that there are simply like too much brand related content on an influencer page or blog or wherever? Like, does it devaluate the whole thing?
I mean, it really depends on what you're striving to do. If your goal is to get customers, then going through the content and building a scalable acquisition channel to get customers, then reviewing every influencer's content and kind of guesstimating whether or not they post too much sponsored posts is not an effective way to scale an acquisition program. So you're better off to focus on that audience data, recruit people, and then if they don't convert customers, then toss them out. If the question is more like, does that devalue your brand by being amongst those other brands? I would argue that for the most part, if people aren't engaged and don't care about that influencer, then they're not going to care about you so much that they then hate you for being in that content. Yeah.
One of the interesting things for me has always been like the creative freedom. So influencers, they are creatives. Businesses, on the other hand, especially when they are like paying, they want to have control. So how should brands approach this? Where's the silver lining?
About content control, basically.
Yeah.
So I recommend definitely having some basic guidelines, and it's also useful just to show some examples of content that's worked on a page like the one that I showed you before. But you want basic guidelines. No swearing. Make sure you disclose that it's an ad. Please make sure that the content isn't inappropriate for children or whatever. And beyond that, give them creative freedom. In some cases, it's really useful to have some sort of concept that you try to rally people behind. So for example, before Modash, before we were more of a SaaS platform, we did services for influencer marketing. And one of the campaigns we ran locally was called Verif 100. So when Verif reached their 100th employee and they were hiring a ton of people, they used influencers to build their recruiting pipeline. And what the concept was, I just threw the idea out in a meeting one day. Let's just celebrate #Verif100 and get confetti and cool 100 balloons and make like a big campaign about it, and share some information with the influencers about the cooler parts of Verif as a brand. So for example, the CEO is a super young guy from Sarama or Hiuma, and some other like fun fact kind of things. So we give them like and we gave them a bunch of high quality confetti to shoot off for their photos. So we give them some creative guidance. We give them some guidelines: no swearing, no talking about Donald Trump in your post and whatever, and make sure that these hashtags are there, and then give them the rest. Then if you see, posts where people aren't in the photo, like they're taking a picture of the ocean or whatever and posting it, those don't convert as many customers. Use those learnings to share with your other influencers and make sure that they have the highest chance of success as well.
Katrin just asked a good question. I'm going to read it out. Is there any suggested limitation on how long time is optimal to work with one influencer? So obviously, at one moment, 90% of his or her followers are familiar with the brand. Do I need to rotate influencers?
For sure. I feel like a lot of the questions you guys ask, and this might be a sign, are really solved by this acquisition model program. So you have a quota, you pay influencers based on the number of conversions they get, and as long as they keep converting customers, you keep them in the program. There's no reason, unless somebody does something really horrible or ends up in jail or something, that you need to remove people from your program. If they're converting customers, then that's the metric that we care about, right? At the end of the day. So
another question just came in. How quickly should an influencer show results with higher priced goods? For example, the followers might consider buying a bit longer.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so I see that you have two examples here. They might want to sample the product, go and touch it in stores, etc. Yeah, so with the ambassador style program, usually we say, okay, implement the quota, and then if they don't hit it for 1 month, then you just tell them that, like, hey, last month wasn't quite good enough. Here are some tips. Let us know if we can help. We're happy to help get you back to the point where you're converting at your quota. But otherwise, on month 2, if you don't reach the quota, then we're going to have to remove you from the campaign. And really structuring it like this is quite good. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So just to wrap things up, and we have a few more minutes to go. I'm going to ask one of those repetitive questions, probably. So about platforms. So in the autumn of 2020, what are the most popular social platforms and channels, and what are like the benefits of each?
So the channels that influencers post on, basically.
Yeah.
So Instagram is still like probably number 1 globally for influencer marketing ad spend in general, which is probably a sign. YouTube is great for products that are a little bit more in depth or require a little bit more explanation and those kind of things, or like showcasing, as Jan mentioned. The nature is that it's good to experiment with all of these platforms. Start with one, obviously. Start with one. Make sure you have good data for that one, and then experiment with the others. Once you've reached kind of critical mass on one platform, then you can kind of move on to the next one. But globally, influencer marketing ad spend is highest on Instagram, then YouTube. Now probably TikTok took the 3rd place, but then after that it just dropped off to basically nothing.
Okay. So what's your take on TikTok, like the hot battleground between US and China? How widely is it used in the Baltics? You said it's quite a bit. I was actually a bit surprised, but do brands need to pay attention to it?
For sure, yeah. By the way, I'm happy to keep going with questions if you have more time. Then I think I'm good to go. I can quickly check and see, because I see that there is some more questions in there. I do have time. So
yeah, we technically have time. I think we have covered most of them, if not all of them. But yeah, don't rush.
For sure, yeah. But on TikTok, China, US, I think that it's likely that Oracle will buy the right to store TikTok's data, and then because that's probably the only thing that the president lets anybody do, and it's China's best, like it's their only move really at this point. Microsoft's pitch to acquire TikTok was rejected by the big guns in the Oval Office. So yeah, let's see what happens. But TikTok will likely be fine. Somebody will buy it. I haven't seen anything really crazy happen where like Facebook has been able to steal TikTok's customers like they did with Snapchat, for example. But yeah. I think it would be
uh,
interesting to see local markets like India, who now there's no TikTok in India, so there's going to be smaller but still very large platforms in those countries where it's blocked.
do you see brands in Baltic take full advantage of TikTok yet?
I'm sure. I'm sure they're not. I might be wrong, but my my suspicion is that if I'm totally honest, there's still so much room for development in this space in the Baltics. Like what we see companies I mean, Baltics, not alone, obviously, like Baltics,
Mm.
Poland, even Finland and Norway, like we see people just aren't pushing as hard on the gas in this space as they could. And usually it's because they're not tracking how much success they're having. So then they're not motivated or incentivized to scale it out. So I think that across all of influencer marketing. So definitely TikTok as well. It's like maybe they try it because the CEO says TikTok's really cool. My daughter loves TikTok, and then they post once or twice there, and then they forget about it and move on to the next
Mm.
thing.
Yeah. Might asked a question 30 minutes ago, but I think we kind of covered that. What kind of software or programs do you use to track the progress of influencer marketing? So yeah, Modash is the obvious one we're talking about here, but yes, there's like quite many tools out there, and you basically try different ones to see what suits you best.
For sure, yeah. On tracking, we're kind of just now implementing like our native ROI tracking and campaign monitoring stuff on Modash. What we're really the best in the world at right now is getting that audience data that I talked a lot about, that you need to run experiments and make good decisions. On tracking, usually the tracking part really happens somewhere else, usually
Mm.
not directly in the platform. We're trying to take a piece of that to Modash now. If you sign up for the monitoring inside of the Modash platform, then you'll get it for free for a little while. If you just include in your little note that we ask for that you heard about it in this webinar, and then I'll make sure that everybody gets in. It's currently in beta.
Mm.
But yeah, so on tracking really comes from the other side. So you're going to need either a little bit of Google Analytics knowledge. You're going to have to know how to use Maxikeskus and promo codes. You're going to have to, use whatever is on the point of sale side or the tracking side to really get the best information. Lots of platforms will kind of try to sell you fake metrics. Anybody who's trying to sell you media value or like some arbitrary ROI metric, like you scored 8 stars out of 10 for ROI. Those people are mostly just trying to sell you snake oil. So focus on tracking it as best you can on your side.
Mm. So one last question before we go. Listening to your method, the ambassador method, and the whole presentation and all your thoughts regarding influencer marketing. So compared to paper post, this also requires quite a bit of time investment from the brand side, from the business side. You need to analyze that, you need to discover new influencers, you need to work with them, provide content guidelines, etc., etc. It seems to be like this never ending job, so you can just like launch and forget. So would you recommend to do this in-house, or should, for example, your marketing agency take care of that?
If you can find a marketing agency that's willing to run this kind of program for you, I would love to hear about that, actually. We've actually tried to give agencies sometimes a company comes to us, like Electrolux is one example, and they say, we have really limited resources in this particular region over here. So we want to work with you guys, but we also need an agency partner to help us. And we try to push that client onto an agency, and they seem to have a really difficult time grasping the concept that I talk about in this webinar, or understanding how they would implement it internally. So it's hard to find. That said, part of the thesis that Modash tries to bring to the market, and part of my vision for how this industry will shape up, is that the people who will be the most successful will be the ones that keep it in-house. because the work, it is easy to see all of the stuff that I talked about today and feel like it's a lot of effort. But the truth is that if you think about pay per post, let's say you get one influencer to post for you every month for a year, then you have 12 influencers across 1 year, and then you have to do the same thing next year. If you do this format, then if you recruit an influencer every month, then next year you have 12 influencers still posting for you. So it's actually a little bit of maybe a little tiny itty bit of upfront effort, not much more than paid for post, but it lasts a lot longer. Sam Altman, who was the president of Y Combinator and now runs OpenAI, one of the biggest pieces of business advice that he gave to Y Combinator startups and to people about their lives is do things that compound. Even Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. So if you can find things that compound, like the method that I talked about today, you will see huge leverage and return in, 4 weeks, 2 months, a year. It just keeps going. You can optimize, you can automate away a ton of that effort. I've seen companies with 2,000 ambassadors, like thousands of ambassadors posting with 2 dedicated employees and a manager. So I think if they can do that with some automated tooling, then you can recruit your 100 ambassadors and have thousands of new customers next year. Yeah.
That's a great note to end today's webinar with. Thanks so much to everybody joining us today. I hope you found the webinar to be a useful one. Remember, you can always watch it on demand as well. You can use your access link to view it at any time. And also, right after the webinar will be ended, we're going to send you a link to a survey. We hope you have a few minutes to fill it out, so it will help us to improve our future webinars. Thank you again, Avery.
You're welcome.
Great insights on influencer marketing, and thank you everybody who attended the second webinar we did. Just ahead, we will be announcing our next webinar today. It will be on October 14th. We'll be talking about expanding your e-commerce business to Finland. The registration will be open today as well, and you can find the link on our website and social media channels. But even before that, actually on September 29th, our Lithuanian office, Make Commerce Lithuania, is hosting a webinar to Lithuanian merchants who would like to expand to Estonia and Latvia. So once again, thank you, and have a great weekend. See you next time.
See you, man. And thank you so much, everybody who joined. Feel free to write me. Maybe I'm confusing.